how does God respond to our pride? How does God punish our pride, if you will? Remarkably, God punishes our pride by humbling himself. What? By taking on flesh. I mean, look at the word humble. It's related to the word humus, which means earth, soil. Humanity means we are of the earth, right? To be human, we are of the earth. Human, humus, humility. God literally humbles himself by taking on our humanity, by taking on humus, by taking on flesh. This is God's response to our pride, to humble himself so that we could possibly learn in the midst of our pride what it means to be humble. Oh my word, how do we in our sinfulness acquire that kind of humility? And here I'll draw from another point of the retreat where Wojtyła talks about the two touches. The two touches. What does he mean by the two touches? We have touched God by our sin, first of all.
Right.
But touching God with our sin, which leads to the crucifixion of the Son of God, at the same time, Christ is touching the Father with our humanity. And here Wojtyła says we have an entry point where we, united with Christ, giving our sinfulness to the crucified Christ, we can be touched by God in a healing, redeeming way. So we overcome sin not by pretending we don't have it, not by burying it and putting on a religious mask, not by moral minimalism and merely following the rules. Rather, we become humble. We become the men and women we're truly created to be. We become saints by allowing our sinfulness to come into the light and receiving in our sinfulness that touch of God that heals, that touch of God that restores, letting God pour oil on our wounds. That's very different than just gritting and following the rules and putting on a pious mask. It means getting naked. It means exposing our broken humanity. And to quote from Christ, it means bringing our whole humanity, and here he's very explicit. Jesus says, make sure that no part of your body remains in the darkness, but that every part of your body comes into the light. Because if every part of your body comes into the light, your body will become a lamp that illuminates for you the meaning of your humanity. That's everything we're talking about here, about the relationship of art and the theology of the body, and this beautiful retreat Wojtyła has given us. The path to holiness. That's what this retreat is all about. Coming into the light with our real broken humanity so that we can become the redeemed men and women we are created to be.
At the end of this this third section, and this is probably the last point we'll touch on, he talks about, he brings up this idea of an artistic conscience. It's a phrase some people will use, and he says it's really a kind of sensitivity to beauty, but it's analogously called an artistic conscience. He says sometimes that this artistic conscience can outstrip our moral conscience, which creates disharmony in the person. But then he goes on to say that, going back to what you were saying about the two touches, he says that artistic sensitivity should be tied to moral conscience, and that this happens above all in the recognition that our sin actually physically touches Christ, and also that we touch God in Christ's sacrifice. And he says the moral and artistic conscience come together when we find beauty in the suffering Christ. Can you explain that a little bit, what he means by that? Because that's one of the more, maybe one of the more difficult points in here.
Yes, it's a remarkable point, and I do expand on it in my commentary. What audacity does the church have to call the day that Christ was crucified Good Friday.
Mm-hmm.
This is an in to the point that you're making, Thomas. What audacity does the church have to call the day in which the sum total of all evil was manifested in the crucifixion of the Son of God? The church calls that day good.
Right.
And if it is good, guess what else it is? Beautiful.
Right.
Even though that day was the manifestation of the fullest concentration of ugliness, of human ugliness. If that day is Good Friday, it's also Beautiful Friday. Because what is being manifested, I got caught on my words here because of how astounding this mystery is. I mean, silence. There's only, before this mystery, we can only be silent.
Mm.
If I can try to put it in words. When the Son of God absorbs both in his body and in his soul the sum total of all ugliness. And let us remember the words of the prophet in the Old Testament, speaking of the one who we turned away from him because he was so ugly. He became so deformed. When he took on our sin, he became so unattractive, so ugly, so repulsive, we turned our eyes away from him.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening here? The love of God is being manifest. The love that would lead to absorbing all of our ugliness so that we could be made beautiful. Who's at the foot of the cross? When Christ is absorbing all the ugliness of humanity, who's at the foot of the cross? The Immaculate One. What does it mean to be immaculate? It's right in Ephesians chapter 5. It means to be all beautiful. It means to be without spot, wrinkle, blemish, or any such thing. John Paul II dedicated his theology of the body to Mary, all beautiful. Right in the upper right-hand corner of page 1 of the Theology of the Body, it says, Tota pulchra es Maria. You are all beautiful, Mary. That's a quote adapted from the Song of Songs. And the date on which John Paul II began writing his Theology of the Body was December 8th, 1974, Feast of the Immaculate Conception. You are all beautiful, Mary. What's happening at the cross? The bridegroom is absorbing all the ugliness of humanity so that the bride might be all beautiful. Mary represents that bride at the foot of the cross. I used to be bugged, Thomas, by ornate crucifixes because I felt like I needed to see the ugliness. And I just want to give a shout out to Mel Gibson. He's a mad genius, that man. Speaking of artists, right? There's a madness about Mel Gibson. But most artists typically go mad because they see things that other people don't see. And I want to just give a shout out to Mel Gibson for showing us full on the ugliness of the scourging and the ugliness of the crucifixion of Jesus.
Right.
We need to see that. We need to know that. But I've come also to realize in this paradox, those artists who design these ornate crucifixes with all kinds of beautiful gold around the edges and other symbols that you look at it and you say, wow, that's beautiful. That's not wrong either. It's both at the same time. And that's the paradox. John
Right.
Paul has this marvelous reflection in his document Novo Millennio Inuente, where he says, saints have pondered this, the utmost paradox of the fact that in the very cry of agony from the cross, my God, why have you abandoned me? The Son of God is also experiencing a perfect union with the Father, which
Right.
is always bliss and ecstasy. And saint after saint have asked this question, how can the agony and the ecstasy mingle here? How can the agony and the ecstasy come together? How can the ugliness and the beauty come together? If they
Yeah.
do not, we are not saved.
Hmm.
He touches us in our ugliness with his beauty. That's what
Right.
saves us. That's what saves us. Those are the two touches.